Well, it is August, y'all. You know what that means? That means that the summer is almost over. And the rest of the year is about to begin. So we've had a pretty good summer around here. We've enjoyed everything that we have gotten to do. We kicked off with Father's Day. Dr. Rutland was here. And then a couple of weeks ago, Pastor Reggie brought a huge word to this house. We had an amazing VBS. We did youth conference. We just finished up the budget for the next year. Had an amazing, just wisdom-filled board meeting. It's been a big summer. But now we come to that place where we just sort of trickle out of the summer and we jump into the fall. And so what we're going to do next week, we have this thing that is called Student Takeover, which just means that the students from all around the campus, they're going to be helping in spots inside of this room. So they're going to be ushering, they're going to be singing, they're going to be running cameras and helping out in tech spaces. I keep looking for somebody to help me preach, but nobody has volunteered yet. But we'll see what happens with that next week. You never know. You get a bold kid that might show up on Tuesday. But next week, you want to make sure you are back for that because it is going to be just one of these big services where you just kind of see every member of our family doing their thing around this house. And then afterwards, we will have food trucks and tables and tents and stuff where you guys can hang out. Parents can meet new parents or singles, people, just hang out, grab some grub, enjoy yourself, and then we can kick off the fall the next week with a new series. Also, we'll be praying for students and teachers next week in the service as well as we kind of launch them into their school year. But this week, right now, we are going to wrap up the current series so that we can kind of put a bow around that and be able to move on. Now, why don't we talk about beer for a minute? Every good Sunday should talk about beer, right? Oh, yeah, that was good. So here's what happened. Years ago, the Coors Brewing Company decided that, you're like, are we allowed to laugh at that? Like, what? I love watching people's faces sometimes. So they decided that they were going to get back into the non-alcoholic beverage game. They had not had a non-alcoholic beverage since the Prohibition, and so now this was their time to restart this product. They're located at the base of the Rocky Mountains. They have plenty of water, so what they decided was, because everybody was sort of becoming more health conscious, they were going to launch a new non-alcoholic sparkling water beverage. It was called the Rocky Mountain Sparkling Water. Sounds genius. But they liked their brand so much that they put this huge Coors label on the water bottle. Now, the problem with the huge Coors label on the water bottle is that it was confusing to people. Nobody wanted to be seen in the car line drinking from the bottle that had the big Coors brand on it. Even if it was sparkling water. Nobody wanted to be seen at their desk, at their cubicle, when people would walk by, drinking out of a bottle that had this massive Coors label on it. So obviously over time, nobody drank it, nobody knew what it was, nobody bought it, and so eventually they just let the brand expire. And sometimes this is what our lives look like. We have this idea, we think I need to have, like this can't be what marriage is supposed to look like. This can't be what raising kids is supposed to look like. This can't be what my career is supposed to look like. And we kind of live in the middle of this discontentment, and it gives us almost the inspiration to restart. But then we think about the other things that we restarted along the way, and then we get a little bit discouraged because we think this is going to end the same way that ended. And so we just decide not to. But what if there is a way that we can restart? What if there's a way you can restart something this year, this moment, that will end differently than the last time? Why don't we jump into Scripture and check this out? 2 Timothy chapter 4, beginning of verse 5, the Apostle Paul is going to write here to his son in the faith and say, "As for you, always be sober-minded, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry, for I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Henceforth, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Do your best to come to me soon. For Demas, in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Luke alone is with me. And then I love this sentence. He says, get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me for ministry. So I want to talk about two people primarily today, and that's Timothy and Mark. And in the middle somewhere, we're going to throw in a little expo on the Apostle Paul. But when we consider Mark here at the bottom of this text, this is really where I want to go. Because Mark is the one that there was a time in his relationship with the Apostle Paul that he actually deserted the Apostle Paul, went his own way. But somewhere along the life cycle, Mark literally restarted to the point that now Paul, at the back end of his ministry, tells Timothy, go get him, go get Mark and bring him because he is very useful. It didn't say just useful, sort of useful, kind of useful. Bring him because he is very useful for ministry. Some way, somehow, Mark shifted gears so that the end would be better than the beginning. He gives us all this sort of formula. He gives us places of focus where if we can look at the life of Timothy and what he commanded Timothy, if we can take those principles and apply those to our restart, we will find ourselves being very useful now when maybe we weren't as useful before. So let's just consider this first command. What did he say? Be sober-minded. Now, sober-mindedness is one of those things that I probably struggle with the most. And the reason why is in my head, I'm a dreamer. And when you are a bit of a dreamer, you can kind of see these fantastic conclusions that are perfect. And then you get there, and it's sorely disappointing because what you see isn't what you saw. And then you get a little frustrated and you don't want to do the next thing because why do I want to put all this effort in? Why do I want to do all this stuff if it's not going to look like what I see? Now, what is the problem with that conversation? Sober-mindedness. We need realistic expectations. We need the expectation to see what we are actually going to see, what the word promises us we're going to see, and not some kind of blue sky made up fairy tale. Sober-mindedness is something every single one of us need to have a grounding in. The battle in the mind is tough sometimes. We have a lot of stimuli, we have a lot of influences, we have a lot of people and situations that are constantly bombarding our senses so that it's forcing us to just sort of create pictures that a lot of times they're not gospel-centered pictures. We're expecting to see something that is not the picture of marriage that God spelled out. We're expecting to see something that isn't the picture of parenting that God spelled out. We want to do it the world's way, and we want to have God's reward. The conflict is you will never, ever have God's reward through the world's path. And so if I want what God promises to be the hope of family, then I have to build that family according to the gospel of God. But if I build that family according to the gospel of God, then my expectation should be nothing less than the one that God promises. But when I talk about sober-mindedness, I'm talking about these times where in my life, I think my front yard is never going to have any weeds. You mow every week. You turn the sprinklers on. Why are there weeds here? You pay the guy to come throw the sprinkles on the yard, and it's supposed to kill all the weeds and make the grass grow correctly. Why is there a weed in my yard? This is ridiculous. Why even bother? I don't even know why I'm paying for this water bill. You pay for the water bill to water the yard. There's still weeds in the yard. There's brown spots. Why do I have brown spots? I'm the only one that lives like this? I'm the only one. I mean, you go home, you think you say all the right things, you think you do all the right things, and then she's mad at you. Why is she mad at me? What did I do? I did everything right. What's her problem? You go to work all day, you come home. You've mentioned it 700 times if you've mentioned it once. When you get something out of a cabinet, shut the cabinet. It's not hard. It's not difficult. Here's another one. When you're putting utensils in the dishwasher, you know the fork part that you actually put into the food? That's supposed to be pointed down. So that when you take stuff out of the dishwasher, you're not touching the top of the fork that somebody's going to put their mouth on. I'm the only one. I'm the only one in this room that has to deal with this. See, these are unreasonable expectations. You'd think they were reasonable. But see, those can just send you down these weird roads. Like, why am I even bothering if they're not going to put the utensils in the dishwasher the right way anyhow? What do you mean, why are you bothering? You're bothering because God Almighty has given you these awesome children and He has called you to steward them for His glory, not so that the fork is always turned the right direction. Like, we have to get our expectations correct. We have to think soberly, sober-minded. Let's look at it like this. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 7, the Apostle Peter gives us some more wisdom here. He says, cast all your anxieties on Jesus because He cares for you. Be sober-minded, be watchful. For your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Resist him, stand firm in your faith, knowing that the same suffering is being experienced by your brothers throughout the world. So let's kind of deconstruct this, if you will. He says, cast all your anxieties on Him. That's like an easy command, and it's really hard to do. You ever been sitting in a chair kind of worrying about something, and then it just rolls through your head, I shouldn't be worrying about this. I'm just going to cast it on Jesus. I don't even know what that means sometimes, right? Because I can't put my hands on it to actually cast it anywhere. Like, I'm just dealing with the fear, or I'm just dealing with the anxiety, or I'm just dealing with the frustration. And the command is cast it, and I don't know what that means. So we have to keep on reading. The casting is then spelled out. Be sober-minded. Okay, that means I need to think about this situation with truth. Let me just tell you this. Thinking about something in a fantastical way, considering something from a perspective of a lie, will never lead you to the truth. It's actually a good idea to have a good handle on what is actually going on. That's being sober-minded. I need to be grounded in what I'm actually facing. Sometimes I think we feel like to be grounded in what we're actually facing is against faith. It's not against faith at all. Many times I need to know what I'm dealing with in order to have faith to overcome it. There's nothing wrong with knowing what you are dealing with. Running away from things never fixed anything. So being sober-minded, he's saying, consider what you are actually dealing with, but also be watchful because Satan is a liar. He says you have to look out for your adversary, the devil. What exactly in this context is he talking about? He's talking about him coming against you, bringing lies. You have to resist the lie, but the only way to resist the lie is to be sober-minded. I'm being sober-minded by resisting the lie. I'm recognizing this as not true. That's a huge deal. Because especially today, I mean, maybe you're not having a problem with this. I feel like I am struggling to find truth. There's so much misinformation about so many things right now that outside of the gospel, it's all sinking sand. It's like this is true for 3 weeks and then it's not true anymore. This is true for 2 months, but then it's not true anymore. This is true for 10, and then it's not true anymore. And we're trying to find something that's not sifting away. We just need to stand on the gospel as truth. We stand on the gospel as truth because when we stand on the gospel as truth, here's what it does. It gives us an appetite for truth. When you stand on the word, you have an appetite for truth so that when someone feeds you a lie and something over here, you can actually discern it because you stand on the truth. When what you believe in the gospel is true, you have an appetite for truth. So when the enemy comes and he feeds you something, you know that's not right. That's not right. I know that's not right. I resist that. And he goes on into this conversation. He sort of gives us the first lie. He says, knowing. So you have a key to sober-mindedness. You have a key to resistance is knowing that the same kinds of suffering, meaning what I'm dealing with in my head, the same kinds of suffering is being experienced by your brothers throughout the whole world. Have you ever thought there wasn't a solution because you thought you were the only one with the problem? Have you ever had a hard time grasping the solution because you didn't think anybody else had ever dealt with what you're dealing with? And so you didn't really want to listen to anybody's wisdom because they don't actually know. They don't know what I'm dealing with. So I can't actually hear wisdom. I can't grab common wisdom because I don't have a common problem. We do this to ourselves all the time. We get all frustrated. We're all anxious. Like, I got a million things to do. No, you don't. You have 5 things to do. A million things you could not do. A million things you should be stressed out. A million things you should be the dumpster fire that you are right now, but you don't have a million things to do. You have 5. What is that? That's sober-mindedness. That's resisting the lie. The lie says you have too much, but you don't have too much. I was at a cheerleading competition that my daughter was in, and I was amazed. I mean, there are hundreds of teams here. I couldn't believe that everybody was number 1. We're number 1. We're number 1. You're not number 1. You're number 85. You're number 13. And I'm not trying to be just grouchy here. It is the end of summer. I am in a bad mood because, now school's coming up and the whole schedule shifts again, and it's just like. Nevertheless, they're still not number 1. Like, even if I'm in a bad mood, they're still not number 1. What is that? It's sober-mindedness. We need to understand where we are. Because here's the thing. Like, if I'm number 87 and I'm just trying to get better, saying I'm number 1 isn't helpful. I've got 86 steps to climb. How about I just shoot for, 80? Like, I could be number 80. I look and I think, if I can work a little harder here, do a little more there, I might get there, right? Like, one of the reasons why we all just quit sometimes, we all just quit our weight loss plans is because here we need to lose 100 pounds, but we're looking at somebody who's never had, they have trouble, like they have to work to gain weight. But that's the picture we put in front of us. I'm going to look like that. No, you're not. You're not ever going to look like that. No, I'm serious. I'm a middle-aged man. I'm not young. I'm not old. I'm 47. I'm not cool. I haven't been cool in 30 years. I have to embrace that. There's nothing wrong with that. I actually like being 47. I actually like looking in the rearview mirror and being able to see all these experiences that I've had. I didn't have those experiences at 17. I was dreaming about doing all the things that I've already done at 47. I love that I've done these things. But I embrace that I'm 47. I think that's enjoyable. Here's what I know. I've jumped as high as I'll ever jump. It's downhill from here. I'm perfectly okay with it. I actually embrace the level of exercise and the level of activity that I am able to do. And the thing is, when I keep all that in perspective and in sober-mindedness, I'm not chasing an impossibility. Because when you're chasing an impossibility, what happens is there's never a reward. You never, ever get there. Sober-mindedness is huge. What you are dealing with, there are a whole lot of people who deal with it. What you are dealing with has been dealt with before. What you are dealing with has been conquered before. God has shown himself faithful before, and he will show himself faithful to you. But you have to embrace where you are. A couple days ago, my son, he actually left this morning to go to Honduras for a missions trip, so he had to have a negative COVID test. So we pull into the parking lot of the Night Owl off of South Florida Avenue, and the lady comes out in her, mask and cover, and it looked like a scene out of E.T., to be honest with you. And he rolls his window down, and she takes this device that looks like a kind of a long Q-tip, and she inserts it into his nostril and tickles the bottom of his brain and brings it back out. And she walks away, and as she's gone and the window goes up, he's like, "Ah! Ah!" Nobody, I bet they don't put that thing that high in anyone else. Son, they've given hundreds of thousands of COVID tests, millions of those around the world. I'm pretty sure they're all done the same way. No. That was further than anyone else's. And he's dead serious. And I'm like, no. But here's the thing. When we go through stuff and we think we're the only one, then all of a sudden the gospel remedy that was the remedy for them isn't the remedy for us. Because I'm more special. I'm more unique. I'm dealing with something they don't understand. They actually do understand. Their testimony should be an encouragement to you. And if you will give the gospel the shot that it deserves, let me tell you something, you'll overcome. You'll overcome. So the first step of this thing is he says, be sober-minded. And then he pushes it into endure suffering. Peter talked about that suffering that everybody was dealing with around the world. This is the suffering that we are talking about. When we are talking about enduring suffering, he's not talking about enduring anxiety. He's not talking about enduring sickness. He's not talking about enduring hopelessness. That's not what he's saying. He's saying enduring suffering, the kind of suffering that Jesus endured. So if we're talking about the kind of suffering that Jesus endured, we're now talking about the kind of suffering that people heap on you because you are who you are and you believe what you believe. Now we're talking about suffering in terms of criticism, suffering in terms of people exploiting you, abusing you, neglecting you, people walking away from you. We're talking about a completely different kind of suffering than some kind of a health affliction. He's not telling you if you're sick, just endure the sickness. That wouldn't make any sense because in James he said, is anybody sick? Let him call for the elders of the church that they may come and anoint them with oil and pray the prayer of faith that he might be what? Healed. So he's not telling you endure this kind of affliction. He's saying endure suffering. Some of us don't even know what suffering is because we never step out for the purpose of the kingdom and actually have suffering to endure. What we know well is we know the kind of suffering that exists when somebody doesn't listen. We know the kind of suffering that exists when we're sick. We know the kind of suffering that exists when we make a mistake and we crash the car and then we have to deal with all the co-pays and what follows after that. We get that kind of suffering. But do we understand gospel suffering? Because gospel suffering, he says, you are to endure. And the reason why we're supposed to endure gospel suffering is because when you push the boundaries and you push the gospel out there, you will actually experience criticism. You will actually experience loss when you are pushing the gospel. And the thing is, if you back off of that, why are you backing off? You're backing off so that you don't have to deal with the suffering, but you're also backing off on the amount of the gospel that you're willing to push. So now to eliminate the suffering, I'm actually walking back from the gospel. So this is why he's saying have the strength to endure the suffering because we need the kingdom of God to continue to be preached. We need you to continue doing the thing that only you can do in the kingdom. We need you to continue reaching the people that you are called to reach. We need you to continue to be that light that God has called you to be. Remember Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter, let's back it up. We'll stay in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7. He tells him in verse 6, stir up the gift that is in you. And then he goes on in verse 7. He says, here's what that actually looks like. You have been given a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. So if I have to stir up the gift, what does that look like? That means that as I stir up the gift, I'm moving in power, not fear. I'm stirring up the gift. I'm moving in love, not fear. I'm stirring up the gift. I'm moving with self-control, not fear. When I grasp that, now I understand it's not just sober-mindedness, but in order to be enduring suffering, I have to do something that actually creates the right kind of suffering. Oh, that's a whole nother thing. How did he create the suffering that he was told to endure? By stirring up the gift. When you are not doing Let me say this. When you are not doing the thing that God has called you to do, when you are not productive in the kingdom of heaven, there will be something in you that is frustrating, and that's not what he's telling you to endure. What he's telling you to endure is what follows when you stir up your gift. And let me just tell you this. The kind of suffering that exists when you stir up your gift, you'll actually have the strength to endure. But what we don't have the strength to endure is the frustration of disobedience to God. That'll drive us crazy. And what's the remedy? Obedience. The remedy isn't casting that care on Jesus. Look, if I'm neglecting God, if I'm neglecting his word, and I'm anxious about that, the remedy is not here, take the anxiety. What's the remedy? Stir up the gift and do something. Like you stir up the gift and you do it. Now you transfer the wrong suffering for the right suffering, and this you have the strength to endure. All right, let's do it this way because I can tell this is exciting. Let's consider the life of the Apostle Paul for a minute, because he's the one telling Timothy to endure suffering. So it seems as if he probably has done this a time or two, where he has a context to have the Spirit of God speak through him. So we see this in Romans chapter 8 and verse 17. He says, you are children of God. You are heirs of God. You are fellow heirs with Jesus Christ. That is super good news. You're a child of God. You're an heir of God. You are a fellow heir with Jesus. Like we sing this in our songs. Like I'm joint heirs with Jesus. I'm an heir of Jesus. I'm an heir with Jesus. Like I'm sitting there waiting on the inheritance. Come on, Jesus. I'm an heir. That'll sell books. That'll fill arenas. That's good stuff. But it bumps into verse 18, which qualifies verse 17. Yes, you are a child. Yes, you are an heir. Yes, you are a fellow heir, provided that you suffer with Jesus, in order that you may also be glorified with him. Right? That's what it says. And then he goes on and he says, indeed, if we suffer with Jesus, then we'll be raised with him. He says, I endure all things. I endure them. So let's push into what he said here in Philippians chapter 3 and verse 4. He goes on. So now he tells them, okay, I want to make sure we're tracking. He says you're going to endure suffering. The kind of suffering that he's talking about is the suffering that follows you serving Jesus. And he says that in order to be raised up with Jesus, we actually have to suffer with him. So now here's what Paul says about his own personal life, his own personal experience. He says, let me lay this out there in terms of what I left. Because if we're going to talk about loss or leaving or suffering, I think we need to understand who he was. He said, if anybody has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness under the law, blameless. But whatever gain I had, I counted all as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I have suffered the loss of all things, and I count them as rubbish, that I might gain Christ and be found in him. I wonder sometimes what part of our reputation that we're willing to give up in order to be found in him. I mean, look, I think we need to be influential in our community. I think we need to build relationships. I think we need to put ourselves out there. But here's where the line always has to be. At the point that I have to be less of a lover of Jesus, in order to gain relationship with you, you are the one I will lose. Because I will not lose him. And when we grasp that, all of a sudden life makes sense. Because here's what we will do. If we're trying to have God in the world, we're never going to win that. It's always going to create a discontentment. There's always going to be the presence of conviction. Here, let me just say, suffering is not conviction. When you're like, watching porn all night and then afraid the next morning that your wife is going to find out, that is not suffering. That's conviction. That's the Spirit of God within you saying, cut that out. Like, stop it. If you're going to work and you're flirting with the guy next to your cubicle and you're afraid when you go home that your husband might find out, that is not suffering. That's not suffering for Jesus. Well, I'm just trying to be faithful. You're not trying to be faithful. You're trying to get as close to unfaithfulness as you can without being your version of unfaithful. Now we'll just talk about what Jesus said. He said, if you even look on somebody, you've already done the stupid thing, right? So let's not try and play close to the world. Paul's saying, I suffered the loss of everything that I might have Jesus. Let's talk about this suffering that he dealt with, because he talked about it very clearly in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 23. He talked about these apostles. And he said, look, I have served Jesus more than them. Served him more. I've worked harder. The person through whom the Spirit of God wrote all that stuff on grace that people like to take and manipulate to mean we don't actually have to do anything. The one who actually penned it, what did he say? I served more and I worked harder. Then he actually told us what it was. He said, I have been put in prison more often. I've been whipped times without number. I have actually faced death again and again. And then just in case you thought he was talking hyperbole, then he lays it all out. He said, 5 times I received from the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. That's 195 lashes. When he says without number, it's at least 195. That's 195 more lashes than I've received for Jesus. 195. He said 3 times I was beaten with rods. That's 3 more times than I've been beaten. Now, I did get spanked as a kid, but I don't think that counts. I wasn't beaten. I was corrected according to a whole nother conversation. Nobody wants to hear about child discipline today, I can tell. 3 times beaten with rods. He said, once I was stoned. I've been stoned. That's terrible. God help me. Not like that. He said three times I've been shipwrecked. 3 times. A day and a night. Adrift at sea. I've been on frequent journeys. I've been in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from fake friends. And then he keeps on going in toil and hardship. Well, he suffered all this stuff. He said, many a sleepless night. Why was he spending sleepless nights? Because he was praying for people. He was praying that the situation would turn around. I know sometimes I get in the middle of something and I wake up from my sleep and I just feel in my heart, you need to get up and pray for them. I think, I don't get up and pray for them. I'm tired. I'm tired? How about get up, have a sleepless night for the sake of the kingdom? That's what he's talking about. Oh, the weather in Colorado is so nice. It's so hot here. Shut up. That's me. I'm talking to me now. I'm having my conversation. He said, in hunger and in thirst, without food often, in cold and in exposure. What is he saying? He's saying, look, quit counting your life as something other than to be used by God. And be willing to give it all up for the sake of the kingdom. Please understand, when Jesus talked about the Pharisees who walked around, who had all the nice little robes and who got the nice seats when they went to church, the people that could stand up on some kind of a platform and pray, and everybody would slow down to listen to all their mighty, great words when they were praying. This is the Apostle Paul. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He had all the luxuries of a Pharisee. And he said, I counted it all as rubbish. I walked away from every bit of it that I might gain Jesus. That I might gain him. What are we willing to let go of for the sake of the kingdom? Well, let me tell you a quick little barometer that I have. It seems like in this house, when we're gathered with the saints and people who love Jesus, if we're not willing to lift up our hands and give him a shout that is due his name, if we're not willing to look like David looked in the presence of bringing the glory of God into the temple, then if we're not going to give him that he deserves in this room, surrounded by people who also love him, we're probably not going to be willing to give what is due him out there. So if you ever wonder, why is this guy always pushing for us to lift our hands and jump around and lift our voices and clap our hands and worship Jesus? I just want our worship in this house to look like gospel worship. And I know that if our worship in this house looks like gospel worship, if we're willing to endure, then we'll be willing to endure. But if we want comfort here, we'll seek comfort there. Then he goes on and he says, hey, do the work of the ministry and do the work of an evangelist and fulfill your ministry. Do you realize that your calling has work? There is your passion, the thing that you have to do, because it's just in your soul to do it. Like it's like a fire shut up in your bones, and to not do it, you can't not do it. You have to, and you can't wait to, and it wakes you up in the morning that you might get out and do that, and then along the way you get a little frustrated because there's work too. He said, no, fulfill your ministry, yes, but do the work of an evangelist. Like you have to do work and fulfill. You have to do work and your passion. People that have lived long enough to have a job longer than 2 years understand that in order to excel at a thing that they're really good at, they also have to do a lot of stuff they don't want to do. It's life. Paul's making it very practical here. But then I love how he breaks it down at the end. He says, hey, go bring Mark. And have him come with you because he's very useful to me. Mark was somebody that Paul and Barnabas met in Jerusalem, and they brought with them to the church of Antioch. And when they went out on their very first missionary journey, they brought Mark with them. And they went through this island of Cyprus, and the work was hard. They preached the gospel everywhere, but it was met with a lot of opposition, demonic opposition. There was just not a lot of fruit. And then they get to the end, and there's like one convert. And it was like in Mark's, it's just one. Like I did all this work for just one. And and he was so frustrated by the work he left. He said, I'm out. I can't do this. It's not what I thought it was. I'm done. And so then the Apostle Paul didn't want to take him on any other of their missionary journeys. That was it. He was done with Mark. But now we come to the end and he says, bring to me Mark, for he's very useful to me. The one who walked away from it all is the one who somewhere along the way turned it back around, restarted his ministry, and found himself fulfilling what he was called to fulfill so that he was very useful to the kingdom. And that's every one of our opportunities. Let me just put this in a very, very local context. About 100 years ago, there was a young man in Texas, and he was born with a deformed heart. And as he grew into his teen years, it became more debilitating, and finally he found himself bedridden. He couldn't get out, he couldn't do anything, he couldn't play. And so his family would bring him food, they'd bring him books, they'd talk to him, and that was his life for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden he was reading his Bible and he came across a passage, and when he came across that passage, it gave him the inspiration to experience the healing power of God. And in that moment he was set free, he was healed of that deformed heart. He got out of that bed and he started preaching the gospel, and he went from town to town to town to town preaching the gospel. And there came a time in preaching the gospel that his little car, he'd have to drive it at night because his tires were bald, because he'd gone to so many places, but he just kept right on going with the bald tires from church to church to church to church, preaching the gospel of God. Found himself here in the late 70s, early 80s, preaching in that building across the street called First Assembly of God. And when he preached in that building across the street, there was a young businessman in that building who was sitting and heard him preach that gospel that way. And it inspired that young businessman to sell everything that he had, to count everything that he gained as loss, that he might have Christ. And then he and his family, and they went all the way to Tulsa, Oklahoma to go to the Bible school that was started by that young man that had a deformed heart in the bed in Texas. And then when the man graduated, the young businessman graduated from that business school and from that ministry school in Tulsa, Oklahoma, he found himself myself now in Lakeland, Florida, starting this church right here that ended up in that building over there, that built this building over here, and we look at it all, we're like, where did all that start? Because somebody decided to write the Gospel of Mark, chapter 11, verse 23, who penned the words of Jesus that said, if you will just say to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, and don't doubt in your heart, you will have whatever you say. So let me just throw it out there. Be sober-minded. Endure suffering. Do the work. And fulfill your ministry, because this time your restart will be everything that God told you it will be.